This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the next 60 minutes, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. Let's start with a run through the markets here for you. So Egypt has been in focus on Sunday, on Monday and on Tuesday. It's been posting losses pretty much consistently across that period, except today, up by over 3% on the EGX30. But is that essentially a bottoming out, or is this essentially just a brief relief rally? We'll find out. Sibanye-Stillwater on an absolute tear, the JSE so far this year. Shares up by over 108%. We're going to be talking about that in detail in just a moment. Here's what's coming up tonight. The South African miner Sibanye-Stillwater aims to cut over 5,000 jobs at its platinum mines. And China opens its new megastructure, the Dashing International Airport in Beijing. And we'll take you on a culinary tour of the delicacies that define street food in Cairo. All that and more in the pipeline for you tonight. But let's start with the UN General Assembly. The European Union Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini says that the remaining parties to the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, if you want to use its formal name, are committed to preserving the pact, even though it's increasingly difficult to do so. The 2015 agreement curbed Iran's disputed nuclear program in exchange for relief from sanctions from multiple parties. But it has since then unraveled after the United States unilaterally pulled out of it in May last year and then acted to strangle Iran's oil trade to push it into wider security concessions.
First of all, the agreement is still in place, that we will continue to work together with unity of purpose to try and preserve it without ignoring the challenges. As you know, the agreement has two pillars: the nuclear commitments and the economic side that is linked to the sanction lifting. On both elements, there is full determination to try and preserve the agreement. On both elements, there are challenges, and there is a will to try and preserve the deal. I will not hide that it is increasingly difficult to do it, and we have discussed today that fact that we will try to continue keeping the agreement in place and overcome the difficulties that we're facing. I think this answers your questions. What I believe is that every step that has been taken so far by Iran, and I underline so far, is reversible. We have constantly called upon Iran to reverse these decisions and go back to full compliance, which has been the case till recently, because this is in the interest of all, in the interests of all. Let me add, this is in the security interest, for sure, of all of us. It's also in the economic interest of Iran. So I believe that, I hope, I'm not sure I believe, but I hope that rationality will prevail and that this meeting today will contribute to preserving the agreement also in the future. I thank you very much.
All right, then, so let's get the latest on this from CGTN's Nick Harper, as part of the team covering the UN General Assembly in New York this week. So, Nick, Iran's getting a lot of attention at the General Assembly so far this week, but what's the word from the country's president in his address to the Assembly?
Well, Rahman, we heard from Hassan Rouhani, the president of Iran, just a couple of hours ago. It was his opportunity to address the General Assembly, but also really address the world and the United States. And there were no surprises. It was a long, sustained attack against the US. Hassan Rouhani accusing the US of merciless economic terrorism, international piracy, saying that the US was silently killing Iran with the harshest sanctions in history. And therefore, he said, he couldn't trust the invitation to negotiation. He said that Iran would not be returning to the negotiating table while those US sanctions remain in place. He also accused the United States of hypocrisy for pulling out of the 2015 nuclear agreement just last year, saying that they turned their back and ran away on these deals and these treaties, and therefore they could not be trusted, making it very clear that at this stage Iran has no intention to try and get this plan plan back on track.
Indeed. So with the US pulling out of the JCPOA, reimposing sanctions, as you mentioned, the Iranians don't want to come back to the table. There's a clear lack of trust there. The other members to this agreement haven't been able to circumvent the sanctions that the Americans have imposed so far. And earlier on, we heard Federica Mogherini saying that essentially keeping the agreement alive is increasingly difficult. So for all practical purposes, isn't the JCPOA dead?
Well, Rama, it all but is. The deal is pretty much dead. Mogherini there is saying that she was hoping that they would be able to preserve the deal, but really not displaying much hope in the words or in the actions of the countries that we're seeing. So all of the countries who have signed on to that Iran nuclear agreement, so the UK, Germany, France, China, Russia, the EU and Iran meeting earlier this morning. Obviously there was one notable absentee, the United States. And they say that they're trying to abide by the agreement, getting the US and Iran to abide by what they signed on to. And there's been other deal-making going on behind the scenes. Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, has been pushing very hard to try and get a face-to-face meeting between Hassan Rouhani and Donald Trump. Both leaders said that that was unlikely even going into this week. Macron saying it would be a missed opportunity if Rouhani returns home without meeting Trump. But remember, no president of Iran and no president of the US has had a face-to-face meeting in 40 years. And I think we also have to bear in mind that sympathy for Iran seems to be waning amongst those European countries. Just last night, the UK, France and Germany in a meeting said that they now agreed with the US assessment that Iran was behind that attack on the Saudi oil facility. So I think the political will at this stage is somewhat waning, making it much more difficult for any type of negotiation or any sort of agreement to be reached to keep this deal alive.
Indeed, of course, we're also seeing sanctions from the United States on any party that's buying oil from Iran. Nick Harper in New York, thank you. Now, a new report from the International Finance Corporation is calling for the total elimination of diesel and gasoline generators and replacing them with cleaner solar alternatives. The report's author argue that $50 billion is spent on fuel every year around the world, and that is simply, they say, too high a cost for society, business, and the environment.
The report estimates that there are 20 to 30 million sites using diesel and gasoline generators globally. These generators are used to power households and businesses. It revealed that these generators consume 40 to 70 billion liters of fossil fuel annually at a cost of $30 to $50 billion.
Globally, $50 billion a year is spent on the fuel alone. Service costs, probably another 15 to 20 billion. Opportunity costs, incalculable when you think about the amount of time and energy spent running these things. If we could take in Africa alone the generators offline, it would be the equivalent of removing 22 million automobiles from the African continent.
Strom added that there's an equivalent of 500 gigawatts capacity globally being deployed by privately owned generators. The IFC report, which is titled The Dirty Footprint of the Broken Grid, looked at the use of these generators in 167 developing countries, excluding China. The report concluded that the generators' toxic emissions have a negative impact on the economy, the environment, and public health. They also impose a cost of up to $2.1 billion on governments.
When you think about the health impacts, these engines emit particulates and ozone, both of which have tremendous health impacts. Massive amounts of greenhouse gas. But what's distinct about these, and the reason why the emissions from generators are different from the emissions from a car, is that they're right where you live and right where you work.
The fossil fuel gasoline machines are a major source of electricity access in Western Africa, for example, where they account for 40% of the electricity consumed. The report calls for innovation and private sector involvement to accelerate the mass substitution of fossil fuel generators for solar alternatives. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
Now then, let's head over to South Africa, where the miner Sibanye-Stillwater says it would like to cut some 5,270 jobs as it works to restructure its loss-making mines in Marikana. Now, the miner says the restructuring is aimed at returning that mine to profitability and to ensure the long-term sustainability of the remaining shafts while driving up, of course, the share price too. Now, Marikana was previously owned by Lonmin before the struggling platinum miner was taken over by Sibanye-Stillwater in a deal seen as the only way to save its 29,000-strong workforce. The miners, who, of course, as you will recall, 34 striking miners, were shot dead in 2012 by police officers in an event that would become known as the Marikana massacre. Now, the job cuts at Marikana, though, come at a time when widespread unemployment in the country is relatively high. It hit 29% at the end of the second quarter, an 11-year high, and it's especially prevalent in the mining sector, where frequent mass redundancies often affect poor African workers. Right, then let's get more details on this. Angelo Coppola has been following this story for us. He's joined us live in Johannesburg with more data on this story. So, Angelo, before the takeover, though, of Sibanye-Stillwater, the takeover, rather, by Sibanye-Stillwater of Lonmin was finalized, Lonmin was talking about cutting as many as 12,000 jobs across its operations. Now Sibanye-Stillwater is talking about a number that's a fraction of that. What's changed in between those two timeframes?
Well, a couple of things, Raman. Firstly, very simply, the PGM commodity prices began to rally, specifically rhodium and palladium. Those were the two shining stars that did especially well. But before we get too excited about this fractional cut, while Lonmin and Sibanye were actually doing this deal of theirs, some 5,944 Lonmin staff were actually retrenched, and that includes contractors. And so that brings the number down that were employed by Lonmin at the time from 32,500 down to 26,500. So there was some attrition there. And let's not also forget that part of the signed deal that was agreed to between Sibanye and Lonmin was a 6-month moratorium on forced retrenchments. And that was the condition set by the Competition Commission authorities in South Africa. Now that lasts until the 7th of December. I've reached out to the Competition Commission authorities because it's very interesting to find out whether they think that the announcement by Sibanye today about this most recent cut actually breaks any agreements or conditions that were set by the Competition Commission themselves. The NUM, of course, that's the NUM, the National Union of Mine Workers, are saying that the Competition Commission isn't taking the process seriously of retrenchments, and so they're very worried. So there was a cut, 5,900 lost, plus this new number, which gives us around 11,000. So we're not that far off the 12,000 jobs that were going to be cut by Lonmin initially, Raman.
Indeed. So what's the reaction? You've covered this partially in your response, but what's the reaction from the union side? Because as I recall, AMCO, of course, is a main union that operates in this area.
Well, look, the NUM, when I spoke to them earlier this evening, was saying that they're very concerned because they believe this is a crisis in the making. The majority union, as you mentioned, is AMCU. They aren't amused. They issued a statement late this afternoon. They're saying that the notice clearly, which is the retrenchment notice, clearly shows the principle of profit over people. They also went on to say that this Section 189, which is that notice to retrench, has now become another weapon by Sibanye-Stillwater to secure those super profits that they've been getting. Solidarity Union, which is the other union involved in the sector, is also not happy. They're saying that they aren't surprised by this announcement of retrenchments, but their anger is directed in a different direction. They're actually maintaining that employees are paying the price for what AMCU did in terms of that devastating 2014 5-month-long strike that happened in the sector. They're also accusing the ex-CEO of Lonmin, Ben Magara, of taking his eye off the ball during those negotiations, which allowed the business to fall into a state of disrepair, essentially. Raman?
Indeed. So mining companies and unions, especially on the platinum side, they're also in pay talks at the moment. But with respect to Sibanye-Stillwater, I understand there's deadlock over there. What are parties not agreeing on here?
Well, we're not sure what they're not agreeing on, besides the fact that there's a big gap between what's being demanded by the union and what's being offered by Sibanye-Stillwater. Of course, you remember there's a bit of background here. Sibanye was seen to win the gold wage negotiations that took place a couple of months ago. So there is a bit of a hard standoff happening between AMCU and Sibanye-Stillwater at the moment. It's early days yet, but essentially what we're understanding from the AMCU leadership, and of course you do know that Joseph Mutunjwa has just been re-elected to another term as leader of the AMCU union. is that they're impatient. They wanted to settle. They want to get this negotiation behind them, but there's no budging from Froneman and his management team. So we're at a standoff at the moment, and we know that AMCU have said that if they don't see some movement, they are going to actually go and declare a dispute, go to the CCMA, and then ask for a strike notice. So we could be entering that phase, and it could be triggered by the fact that Sibanye has now issued this 189 certificate or notice to retrench, and that could be the trigger that forces AMCU's hand at the moment. So it's kind of poised on a knife edge as we're looking at it right now, Raman.
Right, let's step back just a little bit though, because the Marikana massacre happened about 7 years ago. But since then, what has really changed for the miners? Some of the things we were complaining about at the time were the basics, sanitation, housing quality, and so on and so forth. Have these things changed in any way in the 7 years since?
Well, Lonmin have made an effort over time since at the end of the first year of the massacre anniversary. They undertook to fix up the single-sex hostels, to get them organized, to get them properly kitted out. They also planned to do some work in the community, because around the Marikana mine and processing plant, there's a very large tented or squatter community that lives there. Many of those people are families of the workers that are in the actual mine, and they've also attracted a lot of other people. But the infrastructure at this camp is minimal and dismal, to say the least. The living conditions haven't really improved that much, because Lonmin doesn't, or at that point, didn't see that as part of their responsibility, and the government had to step in and actually force them to make good on their promises of trying to get that area sorted out in terms of infrastructure, sanitation, and proper housing. But with those 5,900 people that were retrenched over the last 12 months, plus the talk of these other 5,200 people who are likely to be retrenched as well, they're not going to go home, because they have nothing to go home to their families and homes away from the Marikana area. So they're going to be staying on site, and that's going to just add more pressure to that environment and put more pressure on the infrastructure that already is a dismal failure as it is right now. So we're sitting in a situation where we could have a potential time bomb, and if those 5,200 people are retrenched in the next couple of months, we could see just one spark, and we could have another problem in that area again. So people are watching, the NGOs are watching, the groups that support those communities are watching, and hoping that something will be done to make sure that there isn't a spark that sets off another attack or any kind of other tragedy in the future, Raman.
Indeed, let's see how this all plays out. Angela Kupler there live in Johannesburg, South Africa. Time now for a run through some corporate headlines. Right, then let's start in aviation. Boeing's board has created a new permanent safety committee to oversee development, manufacturing and operation of its aircraft and services. It will also be adding safety-related experience to the list of criteria it considers when choosing directors. These are the first structural shifts that we're seeing as part of Boeing's response to the ongoing crisis over the grounding of the 737 MAX fleet of aircraft after deadly crashes that killed 346 people in Ethiopia and Indonesia. Elsewhere, the British manufacturer Cussons expects conditions in key markets to remain challenging for the rest of the first half of its fiscal year. The cosmetics and soap maker in Nigeria reported declining first quarter revenue. It argued at the time that its key markets continue to be affected by weak consumer confidence and spending, with the Nigerian economy in particular remaining depressed. Over in East Africa, Tanzania's mobile phone subscriptions were up to 43.67 million in the 3 months ending in June. An official report showed a 4.7% rise from a year earlier. Now, Vodacom Tanzania, which is a subsidiary of South Africa's Vodacom Group, remained the market leader for both mobile phone subscribers and mobile money transfers. The rise has been attributed to the availability of much cheaper smartphones in the market. And Volkswagen's supervisory board and workers have given their backing to the car maker's top managers after German prosecutors pressed charges related to the diesel emissions scandal. Prosecutors in the city of Braunschweig have charged Volkswagen CEO Herbert Diess and the non-executive chairman Hans-Dieter Pusch and the former CEO too, Martin Winterkorn, with stock market manipulation. Volkswagen's supervisory board said Diess and Pusch would continue to stay centrally in office. And so run through your company headlines. Well, 20 minutes into the hour, you're watching Global Business Africa. We're back in 60 with more.
It is Chinatown. Against the odds, the People's Republic of China was founded 70 years ago. Since then, it has aspired for change, both at home and abroad. What is driving this endeavor, and how has it managed to evolve with the times? We will look back, and in a new era. The nation is forging new missions and visions. We will look ahead. Tune in to our exclusive coverage of the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic of China.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head out now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Culinary. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back to the program. Let's head over to Addis Ababa now. Global investors in Africa's hospitality sector want governments to develop the tourism sectors a lot more. They're meeting in the Ethiopian capital for the Africa Hotel Investment Forum. They say the continent attracts just about 3% of worldwide tourism revenue, but it can attract a lot more with more government support. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi filed this report.
The United Nations World Tourism Organization says Africa received around 70 million international tourist arrivals in 2018. This was an increase on previous years, but some hospitality experts say the numbers are concentrated in a handful of countries with well-developed tourism sectors.
There is a lot of focus in countries like Kenya, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Rwanda on the MICE segment as well, as we call in the industry, which is the meetings, incentives, conference and exhibition segment. So initiatives like e-visa that Ethiopia has initiated have led to growth in the MICE segment, where meeting planners have used these destinations as potential targets for having large meetings and conferences, and that leads to growth in the need for hotel rooms.
These hotel investors meeting in Addis Ababa also say an underdeveloped aviation industry is holding back tourism on the continent. They hope airlines can spread the word that aviation links are improving.
It gives a vote of confidence for others to perceive Africa in a better brand when we try to project ourselves in a better way. Yeah. So that's what we are doing. Plus, we are also incubating regional African airlines within Africa, like Chadia, Askai in Lome, Togo, Malawian, Ethiopian Airlines, Mozambique, now Tanzania, and many others. This will give Africa its own better share of the aviation and the hospitality economy.
So investors are calling on government to do more.
The African governments come together and promote, the liberalization of African skies. Let's have more planes flying. Let's have connectivity. Let's have frequencies, in every country. Let an African carrier touch down in virtually every part of the African continent. And then number two, of course, is to bring down issues to do with the flight ticket prices. It is very expensive for you to fly within the African continent. You can imagine, for example, from Khartoum to a place like Nairobi, which is almost 2 hours, you pay not less than $500 for you to fly a 2-hour journey. In Europe, that would have costed you almost $60 or $100 at max.
The African Union is campaigning for more border openness in the continent, but so far, just a handful of African nations have liberalized their visa regimes. The hotel investors meeting in Addis Ababa say they are banking on the African Continental Free Trade Area to ease intra-Africa trade and connectivity. This will in turn attract more tourists into the continent and enable them build more hotels. With a projected combined consumer and business spending of $6.7 trillion by the year 2030 from the intra-African trade, the African Union says the service sectors like tourism should be able to catch up with the pace of developed nations. Coletta Njoy, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Now, in East Africa, close to 40,000 jobs have been created in Uganda over the past year as a result of Chinese investments. Don't take my word for it. A report by the Ugandan Investment Authority shows that China accounted for more than 45% of investments made in the country between 2018 and 2019, effectively making it the country's top source of FDI. CGTN's Michael Baleke has been looking at the numbers.
The Uganda Investment Authority says China has registered investments worth more than $600 million over the past year. The investments are largely in agriculture and construction sectors such as roads, bridges, power dams and industrial parks. The investment body puts the number of Chinese companies involved in key infrastructure projects at over 200.
The numbers for the Chinese investments are growing and they are showing an upward trend.
The new investment report for financial year 2018-2019 shows the manufacturing sector as another key area of interest for Chinese investors.
Because of government policy of value addition, most of them who come up for various investments, they are looking at adding value to either local raw materials or even when they import their raw materials, they still add value in this country.
The investment report also shows that India, Egypt, Mauritius, Pakistan and Turkey have also increased their share of investments in the country. There is no doubt that more investors are opening up shop, not just in Uganda, but the rest of Africa. However, the worry now is the high levels of poverty, which are negatively affecting the purchasing power of the local populations on the continent. The situation has been escalated by the insecurity, especially along the borderlines of some African markets like South Sudan and DR Congo. Since February, Rwanda has maintained a closed border with Uganda over political differences.
Those who had some loans that they had invested in the business are now facing it rough. The banks cannot understand what is happening. For them, they are after recovering their own money. And you recall that this was a source of livelihood where children used to get their school fees, where women used to have the meals at home because they would engage during the course of the day and have what to take home. So all this has been now put to hold.
However, investment experts argue that even with the unpredictable environment in some states, there seems to be a growing appetite to invest more in the wider African region. This is expected to improve the region's economic performance and the welfare of its people. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Now, Tunisia's capital has hosted the third edition of the Huawei Day of Tech Innovation in North Africa. The event basically focuses on and promotes tech research in the region, and Huawei presented the latest products and prototypes in telecommunications, mobile phones, 5G and more. CGTN's Adin Chouachi reports.
This event aims to consolidate the digital economy and strengthen its equipment and networks to develop an efficient technological system in Tunisia in partnership with Huawei.
Tunisia is geographically is very important. It's connected to Europe and to Africa. So we are very pleased to have such an event, such an important event for us in Tunisia. The theme of the event is about innovation. We all know that this is a fast developing world. Technology is playing a very important role day by day in our life, in the society and in the economy, of course.
The Education Ministry signed a partnership agreement with Chinese telecom and electronics manufacturer Huawei, under which the company will help digitize Tunisia's primary, preparatory and secondary education and ensure follow-up.
The agreement with Huawei seeks to establish an infrastructure for the digitization process while setting up an ICT network. We are proud of this cooperation with the giant Chinese manufacturer.
The second phase of the project aims to create smart learning services destined to students using new technologies and artificial intelligence.
Huawei will help us share experiences in the field of learning and will introduce new information and communications technologies while keeping pace with the latest digital technologies. The reform in the education sector inevitably goes through the introduction of modern technologies.
Huawei has been present in Tunisia for 20 years. The Chinese company employs about 150 engineers. It has created over 1,000 indirect jobs.
The Ministry of Technology and Digital Economy announced that Tunisia prepares to launch the 5th generation 5G of mobile networks in 2021. The network will be used in various sectors and will be highly profitable, particularly in the agriculture and health sectors. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
It's 18:30 GMT. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. We'll be looking at the latest megastructure in China, the dashing international airports in Beijing. And more megastructures are in the pipeline. The world's largest container ship powered by LPG is up and running.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Right, then let's recap the stories making your headlines at this hour, starting in Algeria. The authorities there have opened an inquiry into a fire at the maternity wing of a hospital in the eastern part of the country that left 8 newborn babies dead. Some of them died from burns and others from inhaling smoke. 11 babies and over 100 adults were rescued from that blaze. Elsewhere, the Democratic Republic of Congo has announced it will start using a second Ebola vaccine in October. The decision is a bid to end the outbreak, which has killed more than 2,000 people since August last year. The introduction of the second experimental vaccine has been endorsed by an independent group of international health experts. Nigeria is set to increase capacity of its China-assisted rail service along the near 200-kilometer Abuja-Kaduna rail line. 16 additional coaches, 10 locomotives are expected in the country by the end of the year, in addition to the existing fleet, and that has all been spurred by rising demand for this service. And finally, the Chinese embassy in South Africa has hosted a cultural celebration to mark the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. A reception was held in honor of the anniversary. A number of South African cabinet ministers were at the event. That's a run through your headlines. Now, engineering is going to be a theme in this third part of the hour. Let's start with some mega structures. Beijing's Daxing International Airport is officially open for business. Our reporter Ning Hong was on the first flight that took off from the new airport.
Newly built highways connect downtown Beijing with the new Daxing International Airport. It's an hour's drive. 7 airlines made their first flights at the airport on Wednesday. Over 80% of check-in counters are self-service, and security checks are smooth and quick. Airlines has dispatched their best fleet. This is Airbus A380s. But this airport is built for bigger airplanes and more passengers. It aims to build an international air hub in the future. China Southern Airlines is set to take 40% of the air transport capacity at the airport.
The construction of a Beijing Daxing International Airport is a major move to fulfill our double hub strategy. We now expect to accommodate more travelers from Europe and the US, as well as from Japan and South Korea.
The airport provides a seamless experience for travelers. We are the first group of passengers to undergo the electronic boarding process. No ID card, no boarding card. All you need is look at the camera and smile. The airport is also a gift to the Chinese people for the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic of China.
Every year, China Southern Airlines adds new international routes. I can feel that people's attention and desire for communicating with Chinese people is increasing.
It is very common for a city to have two airports. And with China actively developing new technologies, I believe there is more to expect in the future.
Regular flights will begin in late October, when the number of daily flights is set to reach 100. The airport is expected to annually handle 72 million passengers by 2025. Ning Hong, CDTN.
A bit of context here for you. Here's a quick review of the speed with which that facility was constructed.
This is what the world-class airport looks like now. But now let's take a look at how it started from scratch. It was all set into motion on December 15, 2014. China's National Development Reform Commission approved the plan for building the new airport. The hub will help satisfy the surging transportation needs of the Beijing, Tianjin, and Hebei region. In less than 2 weeks, construction work began with the construction of west wing runways. It was only a tiny part of the overall layout. The planners wanted to use the winter season to test the foundation during cold weather. Full construction started to be carried out in September of 2015. However, the work had fallen behind schedule as of December of that year. Then, fast forward to September 2018, and the new building is being capped, and the hub is dubbed Beijing Daxing International Airport. The first flight test was successfully conducted in May of this year. The team wrapped up the construction work just over a month later.
Now, a switch towards cleaner energy with a lot less emissions has been reshaping the global shipping industry behind the scenes. This week, a French company with strong ties to China announced the launch of the world's largest container ship, but it's running on liquefied natural gas. CGTN's Shimeng Ji filed this report from Shanghai.
A milestone for the global shipping industry, witnessed by both France and China. In the Shanghai shipyard, CMA CGM, a French company and the world leader in shipping and logistics, launched the first of a series of ultra-large container ships that will be powered by liquefied natural gas, or LNG, 22 months after it first placed the order to China State Shipbuilding Corporation.
The fact that it is LNG powered, this is the first vessel in the world to be powered with LNG.
Named after the founder of the French company, Jacques Sadet, this ship is the flagship of a new fleet that will be able to carry up to 23,000 standard 20-foot shipping containers.
To give you an idea of how big the ship is, its length is 400 meters, and that's longer than 4 football fields combined. But it's not just about the size. CMA CGM says the bow of the ship is painted green to signify its commitment to environmental protection.
Powering our vessels with LNG is definitely the way forward because it allows you zero sulfur emissions. We believe that this is the way forward.
The liquefied natural gas, however, needs to be stored at a temperature that's below minus 160 degrees Celsius. And to optimize insulation performance, the Chinese team adopted the industry's latest Mark III technology.
The Mark III kind of tank minimizes the evaporation rate of the liquefied natural gas, and it's also very thin, so more room can be saved for storing containers. Previously, China did not have this kind of technology, but after a lot of trial and error, we were finally able to achieve the breakthrough.
The new ship is estimated to be delivered in the first half of next year, and CMA CGM says Jacques Sadet, together with his 8 LNG-powered sister ships, will all sail between Asia and Northern Europe under the French flag. Shimengqi, CGTN, Shanghai.
Still on transport, but of a rather smaller magnitude. For years, China's had what are called tailored bus lines. Now, these are essentially special routes that are set up for people in similar locations with roughly similar travel needs. But bus companies have always had trouble making any money on these routes. But now, there might be a solution. Machine learning and algorithms may actually come to their rescue. CGTN's Chen Tong now explains.
If you have trouble finding direct public transport between home and work, bus companies in Shanghai can try to help you out. You tell the bus company your desired route, and if there are 20 or more people with similar demands, the company will set up a tailored bus route for you. One popular tailored route is the number 9 line from the Zhangjiang High-Tech Park all the way across the city to Songjiang in West Shanghai. After 4 stops in Zhangjiang, the bus will go to Elevated Road and all the way to Songjiang. The whole trip takes 1 hour and 30 minutes, much faster than other bus lines.
It certainly took more than 1.5 hours before, because I needed to ride a sharing bike to the metro station, which took at least 10 minutes.
I used to drive to the metro station, and that cost me 40 yuan for parking. Now it only costs me 16 yuan to take the bus.
The bus service provider DSTV has more than 100 bus lines across the city, but has been having one big problem: falsified data. Users who couldn't come up with the required 20 people with a similar problem were encouraging others to falsely fill in demand orders and creating a special line without the real demand. The company says it opened one tailored line for which it had received some 200 orders, only to find out there were only 10 people really getting on the bus. And that wound up proving pretty costly for them.
The costs of operating a bus line are quite high because we have to find buses, drivers, and parking places. The number of passengers didn't pick up after 2 weeks, so the line failed.
DSTV says they need at least a 60% occupancy rate per bus to turn a profit. How to do that? Artificial intelligence to the rescue. The company is now working with Alipay to use AI models to analyze the real demand. The number of people who will actually pay to get on the bus.
We use an AI algorithm to determine the real need between one location and the other. For example, if the real need is 100 orders, but we found there were actually 500 orders submitted, that indicates a problem. The algorithm helps us match real needs.
Alipay says the AI algorithm is now keeping the occupancy rate on the tailored routes to at least 80%, and that the company will be expanding its tailored route service to other cities across the country in the next 3 years. Chen Tong, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
All right, then, so we've focused on the infrastructure and the tech. How about the policy side of it? The city of Wuhan in Hubei province has issued China's first commercial licenses for unmanned vehicles. Now, self-driving vehicles can now not only carry out tests on public roads, but it can also explore commercial operations. Think of logistics, for instance. This is expected to strengthen testing of remote and self-driving tech, those are two different things, while promoting autonomous driving technology in real-life scenarios. That's going to be very interesting to see over time. A quick run through commodity prices here for you. So oil benchmarks on both sides of the Atlantic, they're essentially in the red yet again today. WTI crude 1.4% lower to 11.42 GMT to about $56 a barrel. Brent even lower, now actually essentially in the $61 a barrel range. Some news on the supply side as well. Bloomberg reporting early in the day that Iraq will cut oil output further in the next 5 weeks, but the precise size of the cut was not specified. Here's what's coming up next. I hope you're hungry. We're going to take you on a culinary tour of street food in Cairo.
I've learned how to code in a simple way.
Together with other young people, we're able to make this difference.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about.
CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Before we dive into street food in Egypt, let's head over to South Africa. Mobile phone service providers there are battling against several well-organized large syndicates that target cell towers and strip them quite literally of everything from diesel supplies, cables, industrial-grade backup batteries, the lot. As a result, entire communities are being cut off from telecommunications networks. Here's CGTN's Angela Coppola with that story.
At the moment, there are syndicates operating across the country, but their main focus has been the Gauteng province because it has the highest concentration of mobile phones and cellular towers.
In terms of the total impact, MTN has probably had to replace to the value of 200 million rand this year alone. An additional 100 million rand has been spent on security prevention and interventions. Unfortunately, this is not sustainable, and my fear is that at some point in time that these costs may be passed on to the consumer.
Batteries are being stolen at an alarming rate. At MTN, they've had 4,500 incidents since January. That's a massive jump from 4,000 incidents for the whole of 2018. There's already local and continental market for these stolen batteries.
They find their way to mostly Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Mozambique. But after the recent presentation we did to SARPCO, it was then established that they go to a broader part of Africa, and that is where they have been found in the markets. They have been sold openly in the markets.
The problem is not unique to South Africa, it's not unique to MTN. We've seen these problems emanate in West Africa as well, in some of the Asian markets, and even in some of the Middle Eastern countries where there's power challenges related to the utility.
While the attacks on the towers continues unabated, operators and their contracted security companies are beginning to make arrests.
We had more than 10 years imprisonment for various syndicates. But I need to indicate that the syndicates are highly organized, and we're dealing now currently with 3 cases where the syndicates are likely to be to get a conviction of 30 years imprisonment.
Network operators are fighting a rearguard action, and capital is being diverted.
That instead of spending this money on technology advances or extended, coverage or rollout of our network, we're now trying to repair and maintain the network.
This latest scourge of battery theft from these cell phone towers is problematic, but it's not only situated in South Africa, it seems like it might be a continental issue. I'm Angelo Coppolo for CGTN in Tshwane, South Africa.
Egyptian real estate developers and their counterparts from several countries have met in Cairo to strategize on how Egyptian contractors can expand their reach into the Middle East and the rest of Africa. Here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with their deliberations.
According to Cairo, the real estate market in Africa and the Middle East exceeds $80 billion a year. Egypt's share is only $500 million, mostly in the Arab region. Egypt's real estate developers are focusing on expanding in Africa on the short and medium terms. Developers believe this step is way overdue.
It's integral that our company should have a leading role in the development process for our neighbors and brothers in Africa, just like we did back in the 1960s and 70s. But you have to admit that in spite of the strong ties we have in Africa and the Arab world, our involvement in this sector has been minimal.
Real estate is one of the most successful sectors in Egypt. The huge infrastructure projects and new cities being built by local developers in the last decade have created a strong base and expertise.
We have provided them with the opportunity to construct mega projects in the last 5 years. They worked on constructing roads, tunnels, bridges, infrastructure projects, real estate and housing. It allows these companies now to expand and transform their experience in Africa.
The Tanzanian dam, to be constructed by 2 Egyptian companies, is a model that other developers want to build on.
The Egyptian president himself supported the Egyptian firms in the Tanzanian dam. I personally received the Tanzanian delegation and showed them our projects in Galala Mountain, Khanata, Asyut, Port Said, and the new capital. I told them similar projects will be commissioned in Tanzania.
The government has promised to support developers who target African countries.
We've approved the process of issuing official certificates of experience for Egyptian contractors for them to submit to their clients abroad. We have given orders to local banks to open branches in different African countries. You will witness an influx of Egyptian banks across Africa soon to help finance these projects.
And the African market is ready to receive the Egyptian contractors.
The African market is extremely very important because the population is growing. We have a young population. There is a lot of infrastructure requirements required in Africa. Egyptian builders and contractors and real estate developers are more developed than any other country apart from South Africa. And there is a big potential for the contractors and developers in Egypt to come and open up the markets within Africa.
They need actually technological know-how to be done with them, and at the same time they need some kind of support to be given to the local contractors, their knowledge, because Egypt is being actually developed in this term of the building, and they have also what they call Hadara, civilization, which they are well known of construction and buildings in every different kind. So they can actually contribute their own knowledge and education towards the other African countries.
Analysts believe the best way forward is to create partnerships between Egyptian and local developers in Africa. Apart from African nations that need to develop their infrastructure, Egyptian contractors are also targeting countries that are in the rebuilding process after political upheaval, such as Sudan and Libya. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Still in Egypt, street vendors are earning a living by selling healthy street snacks that range from grilled corn on the cob. If you want that, you can find baked sweet potatoes and figs. and much more. These are usually prepared on charcoal stoves and they're sold during the country's notorious rush hour traffic. Talk about a captive market. Here's CGTN's Adel El Marouki taking you on a culinary journey in grassroots tonight.
Irfan Abdelmenem was looking for a profitable job. Many of the 26-year-old street vendor suggested that he'd sell popular snacks. He is now preparing his first batch of charcoal grilled corn cobs before the rush hour begins.
Thank God I am now making more money. I don't price the corn. If I find a beggar, I give him one for free. If a person looks poor, I give it to him for half the price. If he looks comfortable, he will bargain. Sometimes, a man would take a corn cob and leave the change for me. Look, as long as you enjoy what you do, you will be satisfied with whatever you earn.
A grilled corn cob is sold for 20 to 30 US cents. It's cheaper than most popular meals in Egypt. That's why demand for these treats is high. There's another popular snack here that is still within the same price range: sweet potatoes.
Most Egyptians are used to eating lots of beans, so sweet potatoes is different. You can eat it as it is or make it salty. I have a special spices mix of salt, cumin and coriander. It's delicious. You can eat sweet potatoes and feel full, so it's kind of a meal. I also sell it raw, but as you can see, I clean it very well.
Teaming up to sell diversified snacks together, Gamal and Irfan stand at 4 different locations daily. They start with the morning and evening rush hours of employees and students. In the evening, they move to where pedestrians will be for an outing.
I used to love corn, but now I don't have the teeth for it. Sweet potatoes is something I can still enjoy. They are also the cheapest food there is. And for the vendors, they are much more profitable than other foods. Koshari now costs £15, so many people get to enjoy these snacks. A couple would buy a couple of corns and enjoy them with a great view of the Nile. There is no cheaper outing.
These things are healthy. Whether it's corn, sweet potatoes, they're beneficial. I would not like my kids to eat chips or such junk. These snacks have also a different taste than the usual fruit snacks. It is a happy time when we all bake sweet potatoes at home.
Whether you'll enjoy them in the street or at home with the ones you love, these delicious snacks are seasonal. When corn and sweet potatoes are out of season, these same vendors will switch to figs when the weather gets warmer. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Right, and now all of a sudden I'm hungry. Right, what other things to focus on though? The currencies. So let's focus on Egypt. The Central Bank of Egypt is holding its rate-setting meeting tomorrow. The general consensus is that there's room for a rate cut of some kind, perhaps anywhere between 50 basis points all the way up to 100. Will it happen? That's one key question. Nonetheless, the context is an interesting one. If you look at the dollar rate to the Egyptian pound, it's actually one of the better performing currencies across Africa so far this year. It's gained over 8%. But will they cut? That's a $1 million question. We'll have an answer for you in tomorrow's edition of the program. That's it for tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour or so. Several ways to get your thoughts back to us. All of them are on your screens right now. I'm Raman Yang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.